Honestly, that accent. Just pull the water.
En fait, je parle couramment 6 langues et je gère 3 de vos fiducies offshore en Suisse. Autre chose.
The man who could buy the entire city block didn't think twice about the woman serving his water. To him, she was invisible, a ghost in a black apron, notable only for the faint, unplaceable accent he found grating. He decided in a moment of casual cruelty to make an example of her. He wanted to show his business partner what real power looked like. But he made a catastrophic mistake. He assumed the woman holding the tray was insignificant. He didn't know he was speaking to Annalise Dubois, and that with a few perfectly chosen words, she was about to take his entire world apart. The air inside Le Chêne Doré was thick with the scent of money and truffled butter. It was a Tuesday night in downtown Chicago, but for the patrons of this exclusive establishment, the day of the week was irrelevant. Time was measured in stock market closings and the uncorking of vintage Bordeaux. For Annalise Dubois, time was measured in 8-hour shifts, the ache in her feet, and the careful balancing of plates laden with seared scallops and foie gras. She moved between the tables with a practiced, almost liquid grace. Her uniform was simple: a crisp white shirt, black trousers, and a black apron tied neatly at her waist. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant bun, a style that did little to soften the sharp intelligence in her grey eyes. Most patrons barely registered her presence. She was a function, a pair of hands that refilled their wine glasses and cleared their plates. She preferred it that way. Anonymity was a shield. Tonight, however, her shield was about to be tested. Table 7, the most coveted booth in the restaurant, was occupied by Raphael Montclair. Montclair was not just wealthy. He was a force of nature, a tech mogul who had clawed his way from a garage in Palo Alto to the gleaming pinnacles of global finance. He was loud, brash, and carried his new money like a weapon. His suit was a custom-tailored Xenia, worth more than Annalise's annual salary, but he wore it with the discomfort of a man who still felt the phantom itch of a cheap hoodie. Everything about him was an overcompensation: the booming laugh, the diamond-encrusted watch that blinded the busboys, the way he dismissed the sommelier with a wave of his hand, claiming to know more about the vineyard than the man who had dedicated his life to it. With him was a man of a completely different vintage. Mr. Laurent Dubois was older, his silver hair impeccably styled his suit, a quiet charcoal grey that spoke of generations of wealth, not a single explosive IPO. He was a potential investor from a Swiss consortium, a man whose approval Raphael desperately needed for his latest, most ambitious venture, the acquisition of a massive European media conglomerate. The deal was worth billions. The dinner was worth everything. Annalise had served men like Raphael Montclair before. They were a specific breed men who believed their net worth gave them a license for casual disdain. She approached the table, her water pitcher cool and heavy in her hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I offer you some water to begin? Still or sparkling?" Her voice was low and clear, but it carried a trace of her upbringing, a soft melodic lilt that hinted at French, but not the Parisian French one heard in movies. It was gentler, more nuanced. Raphael Montclair didn't even look at her. He was in the middle of a monologue about his new yacht. "So the helipad is reinforced titanium. You wouldn't believe the permits I had to pull." He gestured dismissively. "Sparkling. And bring the best bottle of Montrachet you have, the 09. Don't bother me with a list." "A very fine choice, sir," Annalise said, her expression unreadable. Mr. Laurent, however, did look at her. His eyes, a piercing blue, held a flicker of curiosity. He smiled politely. "Still for me, please, mademoiselle." "Thank you." Annalise inclined her head and moved away, her back straight, her steps silent. She felt Raphael's gaze on her for the first time, not as a person, but as a subject of brief, irritating analysis. When she returned with the water and the wine, Raphael was trying to impress Laurent with his supposed worldliness. The problem with America, Laurent, he boomed, is the service. It's all so unrefined. Everyone's trying to get somewhere else. No pride in their work. You go to a place like this, you pay $500 for a steak, and you get a waitress who sounds like she just got off a boat from who knows where. He looked directly at Annalise as she poured Mr. Laurent's still water. The comment was a dart thrown with casual precision, meant to wound and amuse his guest. Annalise didn't flinch. Her hand remained steady. Mr. Laurent shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The jab was crude, unnecessary. It reflected poorly on his host. "Raphael, please." But Raphael was on a roll. He smirked at Annalise. "What is that accent anyway? Swiss-Belgian, I can't quite place it. You should really work on that if you want to work in a place of this caliber." The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The low hum of the restaurant seemed to fade away. Maria, the restaurant's manager, and Annalise's fierce protector, watched from her post near the kitchen, her hands tightening into fists. She knew a little of Annalise's story, enough to know that the woman pouring water held more grace and education in her little finger than Raphael Montclair held in his entire bloated portfolio. She started to move forward, but a flicker of movement from Annalise stopped her. Annalise finished pouring the water. She placed the pitcher down softly. She did not look angry. She did not look hurt. She looked thoughtful. She turned her head slightly, her grey eyes finally meeting Raphael Montclair's smug gaze. And then she spoke. Her voice was different now. The soft, melodic lilt was gone, replaced by the crisp, impeccably pure French of the academic elite. It was the French of the Sorbonne of Genevan, diplomatic circles of lectures at Harvard University. It was flawless. Monsieur, vous confondez l'accent avec l'origine et la valeur d'une personne avec sa fonction actuelle. Comme l'a écrit Proust, le véritable voyage de découverte ne consiste pas à chercher de nouveaux paysages, mais à avoir de nouveaux yeux. Peut-être qu'avec de nouveaux yeux, vous verriez plus qu'une simple serveuse. Sir, you confuse an accent with origin, and a person's worth with their current role. As Proust wrote, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Perhaps with new eyes, you would see more than just a waitress. The silence that followed was absolute. Raphael Montclair's jaw, which had been set in a cocky smirk, went slack. He understood enough French to know he had just been intellectually disemboweled, but not enough to grasp the full poetic weight of the execution. He stared at her, his face a kaleidoscope of shock, confusion, and burgeoning fury. He had tried to swat a fly, and it had roared back like a lion. But the true impact was on the other side of the table. Mr. Laurent Dubois' polite mask had dissolved. His blue eyes were wide, not just with surprise, but with dawning, incredulous recognition. He stared at Annalise as if he were seeing a ghost. The Proust quote was one thing. Any educated person might know it. But the accent, the specific cadence, the aristocratic precision of her pronunciation. It was a key unlocking a door in his memory that had been sealed for years. He leaned forward, his voice a hushed whisper, his own French as natural as breathing. C'est l'accent du canton de Vaud, spécifiquement de la région du lac Léman. Je n'ai pas entendu cette pureté depuis des années. Qui êtes-vous, mademoiselle? That is the accent of the Vaud canton, specifically from the Lake Geneva region. I have not heard that purity in years. Who are you, Miss Annalise? Simply offered him a small, enigmatic smile. She picked up her tray, her composure absolute. "I am your waitress," she said, her voice back to its softer accented English. "I will return with your Montrachet shortly, sir." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving a billionaire utterly humiliated, and his Swiss investor staring after her, his multi-billion-dollar business deal completely forgotten, replaced by a single burning question. The walk back to the kitchen felt like crossing a vast, silent desert. Every eye in the dining room seemed to follow Annalise. The busboys stopped polishing glasses. The chefs paused spatulas hovering over sizzling pans. They had all heard it, the sudden shift, the quiet authority, the linguistic checkmate that had silenced the loudest man in the room. When she pushed through the swinging doors into the stainless steel sanctuary of the kitchen, Maria was there waiting. The manager's face was a mixture of fierce pride and deep concern. "Annalise," she began, her voice low. "Are you all right? That man is a pig." Annalise let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A faint tremor ran through her hands, the only sign of the adrenaline coursing through her. She placed the tray on the counter with deliberate care. "I'm fine, Maria. He's just a bully. Bullies are only powerful when you let them be." "What you said," Maria shook her head in awe. "My French is from my grandmother in Quebec. Yours was from another world." It was the only language that seemed appropriate for the occasion, Annalise said, with a wry, tired smile. She tried to busy herself checking orders on the rail, but her mind was replaying the scene. She hadn't intended to reveal that part of herself. For 2 years, she had carefully constructed a new life, a simple life built on the foundation of anonymity. In one moment of defending her dignity, she may have set a torch to the entire structure. The look on Mr. Laurent Dubois' face, it wasn't just surprise. It was recognition. And that was far more dangerous. Back at table 7, the atmosphere was arctic. Raphael Montclair sat stiffly, his face flushed a deep mottled red. The public nature of his humiliation was a new and agonizing experience. He was a man who controlled every room he entered. But that waitress, she hadn't just talked back. She had redefined the room, casting him as the uncultured boor and herself as the quiet aristocrat. He felt a rage so potent it was almost blinding. The nerve, he finally hissed, his voice low and venomous. The absolute nerve of that woman. "She's fired. I'll see to it she's fired before the appetizer arrives." Mr. Laurent Dubois barely heard him. He was still staring at the kitchen door, his mind racing. Dubois. Her name tag had been simple, Annalise. But his name was Dubois. It was a common enough name in the French-speaking world, but combined with that accent, that specific old-world Vaudois pronunciation. Raphael Laurent said, his tone sharp, cutting through the billionaire's fury. "Forget about firing her. Do the opposite. I need you to find out everything there is to know about that woman." Raphael blinked, thrown off balance. Why she's a nobody. "She insulted me. She quoted Proust in flawless academic French to put you in your place," Laurent corrected him coolly. "Nobodies do not do that. She is not who she appears to be. There is something else going on here." His mind was connecting dots at lightning speed. The Dubois name, the Vaud accent, the rumors he'd heard years ago about old Philippe Dubois' brilliant, rebellious daughter who had vanished from the University of Geneva after a family schism. The girl who had gone on to Harvard, they said, before disappearing completely. Could it possibly be, "I don't care who she is"? Raphael snarled, his ego still bleeding. "The deal, Laurent. Let's talk about the deal. The media conglomerate." "The deal," Laurent said. his voice dropping to a level of seriousness that finally got Raphael's full attention, is currently secondary to my curiosity. That woman interests me more than your projections for quarterly growth. Do you understand? Raphael understood. He understood that the Swiss investor, the key to his entire empire-building fantasy, was now obsessed with a waitress. The rage shifted, curdling into a frustrated, pragmatic panic. The power dynamic had been completely inverted. His multi-billion-dollar future was now inexplicably tied to the woman in the black apron. Fine, he ground out, pulling out his phone. He typed a furious text to his long-suffering executive assistant, a woman named Jessica, who was on call 24/7. Jessica. Restaurant is Le Chêne d'Or. Waitress. Name Annalise. Dark hair. Has an accent. Find out everything. Who is she? Where is she from? What is her story? I want a full dossier on my desk by 9 a.m. Spare no expense. This is priority 1. He put the phone down with a thud. It's being handled. When Annalise returned with the ludicrously expensive bottle of Montrachet, the tension at the table was a physical presence. She performed the ritual with professional detachment, presenting the bottle, uncorking it, pouring a small amount for Raphael to taste. Raphael swirled the wine, sniffed it, and took a sip, his expression sour. He was looking for a flaw, any reason to send it back to regain a sliver of control. But the wine, like Annalise's French, was perfect. He gave a curt, angry nod. Annalise poured for Mr. Laurent, her eyes carefully avoiding his. But she could feel his gaze on her, intense and analytical. As she leaned over, he spoke again, his French soft for her ears only. Le nom de mon grand-père était aussi Dubois. Il venait de Montreux. Un homme têtu, mais brillant. Il croyait que la connaissance était la seule vraie richesse. My grandfather's name was also Dubois. He came from Montreux. A stubborn man, but brilliant. He believed knowledge was the only true wealth. Annalise froze for a fraction of a second. Her hand holding the bottle was perfectly still. Montreux. Her grandfather. Her beloved grand-père, the one who had secretly funded her first library card, who had smuggled books on art and philosophy past her domineering father. The one who had told her that her mind was a fortress no one could ever conquer. She straightened up her face, a pale, beautiful mask. She looked at Laurent Dubois, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her features, a hint of sorrow, of loss of a shared history she could not acknowledge. She responded in English, her voice barely a whisper. He sounds like he was a wonderful man, sir. She finished pouring and retreated, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was him, or at least connected to him. The world she had run from, the gilded cage she had so desperately escaped, had just found her in a Chicago restaurant, all because a brutish billionaire couldn't stand her accent. Later that night, long after her shift had ended, Annalise sat in her small, sparsely furnished apartment above a noisy bookstore. It was her sanctuary, filled with second-hand books and the lingering scent of old paper. She wasn't a waitress here. She was herself. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Maria. A man was in, after you left, asking questions, dressed in a suit. Said he was from Mr. Montclair's office. I told him our employee records are private. Be careful, Annie. Annalise closed her eyes. The hunt had begun. Raphael Montclair was looking for leverage, a weakness, a way to reclaim his power. Mr. Laurent Dubois was looking for a ghost. Both men, in their own way, were tearing down the walls she had so carefully built, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that they were going to find more than they bargained for. They were about to uncover the story of Annalise Dubois, the heiress who had traded a fortune for freedom, and whose greatest secret was not the language she spoke, but the reason she had to hide it. The next morning, Jessica Raphael Montclair's hyper-efficient assistant placed a slim, lavender-scented folder on his vast obsidian desk. Raphael had been pacing his 80th floor office since sunrise, the panoramic view of Lake Michigan, doing nothing to soothe his agitated state. He snatched the folder. "That's it," he barked, flipping it open. "I told you to spare no expense. This looks like a high school book report." Sir Jessica said, her voice calm, and measured a practiced defense against his temper. "Annalise Dubois is a ghost. The private investigator I hired called me at 4 a.m. He said in 20 years of practice, he's never seen anything like it." Raphael scanned the single page inside. It was maddeningly sparse. Name Annalise Dubois, current address. An apartment in Wicker Park, rented 2 years ago, paid in cash 6 months at a time. Employment waitress Le Chêne Doré, hired 2 years ago, references checked out from a Parisian cafe that upon further investigation doesn't seem to exist. Financials. No credit cards, no bank accounts under her name, no digital footprint, no social media presence whatsoever. It's as if she was born the day she started working at the restaurant. This is useless. Raphael slammed the folder down. A ghost. Everybody has a past. Dig deeper. Tax records, school records, anything. There are no tax records prior to 2 years ago, sir. It's as if she didn't exist in the US before then. We're running facial recognition against international databases, but it's a slow process. Jessica hesitated. There is one thing. The investigator noted that the name Dubois is prominent in Swiss banking and historical art circles, particularly in Geneva. But there's no direct link to a waitress in Chicago. It's likely a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences. Raphael muttered, his mind replaying the look on Laurent's face. The Swiss investor hadn't just been intrigued, he'd been thunderstruck. He knew something. His phone rang. It was Laurent. Raphael, the Swiss investor's voice was crisp all business. "Cancel my flight back to Zurich. I'm staying in Chicago for a few more days. I've made some inquiries of my own. I believe we need to approach the situation with your waitress differently." "What do you mean, differently?" Raphael asked, irritated. "I'll just offer her money. Everyone has a price." There was a dry chuckle on the other end of the line. "Raphael, you still don't understand. You think you're dealing with an employee you offended. I believe you are dealing with a woman who chose to be a waitress. There is a profound difference. Money will not work here. It may even be insulting. I want to meet with her, but not at the restaurant. It must be on neutral ground. And you will not lead the conversation. You will listen." The sheer audacity of the command left Raphael speechless. He was being told to sit down and shut up, all because of a waitress. But with his deal on the line, he had no choice. "Fine. I'll have my assistant arrange it." Meanwhile, Annalise was living in a state of quiet dread. Maria's text had confirmed her fears. They were digging. She spent the day in the hushed halls of the Art Institute of Chicago, her one true refuge. She stood for a long time before Monet's haystacks, not just seeing the paintings, but feeling the history in each brushstroke, the artist's desperate attempt to capture a fleeting moment of light. Her life had become a fleeting moment, and she knew the light was changing. Her past was not a simple one. It was a gilded cage forged by her father, Philippe Dubois, a man who ran his family like he ran his centuries-old investment bank in Geneva, with an iron will and an unyielding demand for conformity. Annalise was his greatest asset and his greatest disappointment. She had a mind that could dissect complex financial models as easily as it could deconstruct 18th-century French poetry. Her father wanted her to take over the bank. He had her life mapped out, a business degree from the University of Geneva, a marriage to the son of another powerful banking family, a life spent in the rarefied, suffocating air of European old money. But Annalise had inherited her grandfather's soul. She dreamed of dusty archives, not stock portfolios. Her passion was for art history, specifically for the works of a brilliant but tragically obscure Rococo painter named Jean-Baptiste Jouvet, a contemporary of Fragonard, who had died in poverty, his best works lost to history. This was her rebellion. She secretly applied to Harvard's prestigious art history doctoral program and was accepted. She remembered the final confrontation with her father in his cavernous, leather-bound library overlooking Lake Geneva. Art history, he had thundered, his face puce with rage. You would throw away your birthright to study paint on a canvas, to be a teacher, a museum curator. You are a Dubois. You will not embarrass this family with such sentimental nonsense. It is not nonsense, Papa. She had pleaded her thesis proposal, clutched in her hand. Jouvet's work is a missing link in the Rococo period. I think I know where his lost collection might be. I forbid it, he declared. You will unenroll from this American foolishness, and you will begin your internship at the bank on Monday. That is final. That night, Annalise had made her choice. She packed a single bag, took the emergency cash her grandfather had left her in a secret trust, and walked away from billions. She vanished. She cut off all contact, created a new, simpler identity, and fled to a place where no one would look for the heiress of the Dubois dynasty, a Waitress's station in Chicago. The French cafe reference had been a clever fabrication, a digital dead end she'd paid a hacker in Paris to create. For 2 years it had worked. Her peace was shattered by a phone call that evening. It was Maria. Annie, Mr. Montclair's assistant, called the restaurant. They want a meeting with you. Not here. At a private room in the Drake Hotel. They said they will compensate you for your time. And Mr. Laurent Dubois will be there. Annalise's heart sank. The Drake Hotel. Neutral ground. This wasn't about a complaint anymore. This was an interrogation, or an offer. She didn't know which was worse. What should I do, Maria? You should go. Maria said, her voice firm. You can't run from this, honey. You looked them in the eye and spoke your truth last night. You have to keep doing that. Don't let them think they scared you off. Maria was right. Running again would only confirm she had something to hide. She had to face them, but on her own terms. Okay. Annalise said, her resolve hardening. Tell them I will be there. But I have one condition. The next day, in a lavishly appointed suite at the Drake Hotel, Raphael Montclair paced while Laurent Dubois sat calmly by the window, looking out at the city. What kind of condition? Raphael grumbled. Is she going to ask for a raise? Jessica entered the room. Annalise Dubois has agreed to the meeting. Her condition is that she will not accept any monetary compensation for her time. Raphael stopped pacing. What she's turning down, free money. Who does that? Laurent smiled faintly. Someone who wants to make it clear that she cannot be bought. I told you, Raphael, you are out of your depth. When Annalise arrived, she was not wearing her waitress uniform. She wore a simple, well-tailored grey dress. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she carried no purse. She looked poised, elegant, and completely in control. She radiated an aura of quiet confidence that made Raphael's expensive suit feel like a costume again. She entered the room and gave a slight nod to both men, her gaze level and direct. Gentlemen. Miss Dubois Laurent began rising to his feet. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. Annalise sat her posture perfect. Raphael remained standing, trying to loom over her. It didn't work. She seemed to occupy her space with an unassailable dignity. Look, Raphael started dispensing with pleasantries. About the other night, my comments were out of line. But this situation has gotten out of hand. Laurent here seems to think you're some kind of, I don't know, a secret agent or a long-lost princess. Annalise's eyes flickered towards Laurent. Mr. Dubois is a perceptive man. Laurent leaned forward, his expression serious. Mademoiselle, I will be direct. My family knew the Dubois family of Geneva. I knew of Philippe Dubois' brilliant daughter, who studied at Harvard, who wrote a groundbreaking preliminary thesis on the lost works of Jean-Baptiste Jouvet, a young woman who disappeared 2 years ago. I believe you are that woman. The air crackled with tension. Raphael stared dumbfounded from Laurent to Annalise. An art history thesis. A lost painter. This was the grand secret. It seemed absurd. Annalise held Laurent's gaze. There was no point in denying it any longer. The shield of her anonymity had been shattered. My life in Geneva is in the past, she said, her voice even. I have chosen a different path. A path that leads to waiting tables. Raphael scoffed, unable to help himself. The idea was simply too bizarre for him to comprehend. You ran away from a fortune to pour water for people like me. I ran away from a life that was not my own to build one that is. Annalise corrected him, her voice dangerously quiet. There is more honor in pouring water with a free spirit than in commanding a boardroom with a captive one. Something you, Mr. Montclair, would never understand. Before Raphael could retort, Laurent intervened, his eyes gleaming with excitement. This was bigger than he had imagined. Annalise, if you are who I think you are, then this is not a coincidence. It is fate. He looked at Raphael, then back at Annalise. The media conglomerate Raphael is trying to acquire. Its most valuable and most secret asset is not a television station or a newspaper. It is a private art collection held in a vault in Luxembourg. It has been hidden from the public for 70 years. It is known as the Jouvet collection. Annalise's blood ran cold. The Jouvet collection. The mythical lost treasure she had dedicated her academic life to. The very thing her father had mocked her for. It was real, and it was in the hands of the man who had humiliated her. The ultimate bitter irony. Raphael finally understood. His jaw dropped as the pieces clicked into place. The deal, the waitress, the obscure painter. It was all connected. He wasn't just dealing with an educated waitress. He was dealing with the world's foremost, and perhaps only expert, on the most valuable secret asset in the multi-billion-dollar deal of his life. He looked at Annalise, truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a servant, not as an obstacle, but as the key. The woman he had tried to crush was the only person in the world who could tell him if his treasure was real. The silence in the hotel suite was no longer just tense. It was heavy with the weight of revelation. Raphael Montclair, a man accustomed to being the center of every universe he occupied, felt the floor drop out from under him. He had built his empire on data, on predictable algorithms and ruthless acquisitions. Annalise Dubois was an anomaly he could not compute. He had scorned her for her job, and now that very job was the only reason his path had crossed with the one person who held the key to his magnum opus. The Jouvet collection. Annalise repeated her voice, a low, resonant whisper. It was as if she were speaking the name of a lost loved one. It's real. It wasn't destroyed during the war. Very real, Laurent confirmed, his eyes fixed on her. He could see the scholar's passion ignite behind the waitress's weary facade. It was acquired by the founder of the media group in the late 1940s under questionable circumstances. It has been their secret jewel ever since. But there's a problem. The board is nervous. Just before the founder died, he expressed doubts about the authenticity of several key pieces. There are no other Jouvet experts. His work is too obscure. The provenance documents are a mess. For Raphael's acquisition to be approved by my consortium, we require absolute verification of the collection's authenticity and value. Without that verification, the deal collapses. Raphael finally found his voice a strained, hoarse version of its usual boom. We've had appraisers from Sotheby's and Christie's look at it. They're baffled. They can confirm the canvases are of the period the paint is right, but they can't be sure. They say the style is similar to Fragonard, but with idiosyncrasies they can't place. They can't authenticate it, because they don't know what to look for. Annalise finished for him, her mind already racing through her years of research. Jouvet's brushwork, his use of a specific cobalt blue, mixed with bismuth for his skies the way he painted lace as if it were spun glass. These are his fingerprints. Only someone who has spent years studying his few known sketches and his correspondence would know them. She looked from Laurent to Raphael, a new kind of power settling over her. The hunted had become the hunter, the key master. She held the fate of their fortunes in her hands, hands that had just 48 hours earlier been clearing their dinner plates. Raphael, for the first time in his adult life, felt completely powerless. He swallowed his pride, a bitter pill that seared his throat. Miss Dubois, Annalise, we need you. It was the closest he could get to an apology, an admission of defeat. We need you to come to Luxembourg to authenticate the collection. We will pay you anything. Name your price. A consulting fee. A percentage. Anything. Annalise leaned back in her chair, a faint, ironic smile playing on her lips. The man who had sneered at her accent was now begging for her expertise. The world had a dark, beautiful sense of poetry. Mr. Montclair, she said, her tone cool and level, you still believe everything can be solved with money. Did our first meeting teach you nothing? My price is not something you can write on a check. Then what is it? Raphael asked, his desperation palpable. Annalise paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. She looked at Laurent, a man from her world, a man who understood the currency of legacy and honor. Then she looked back at Raphael, a man who only understood the currency of well-currency. Her terms would have to speak to both of them. First, she began holding up a finger. This will not be a consultation. It will be a formal academic investigation under my sole direction. I will have unrestricted access to the entire collection, all related documents, and the company's historical archives. My findings will be my own, and they will be delivered without influence or prejudice. Laurent nodded immediately. Of course. That is standard scholarly practice. Second, she continued, her gaze shifting to Raphael. You, Mr. Montclair, will fund a new foundation, the Dubois Jouvet Foundation for Art, Historical Research and Provenance. It will be endowed with a seed capital of $25 million. Raphael choked. 25 million. A small price to pay to secure a multi-billion-dollar deal, wouldn't you agree? Annalise said smoothly. This foundation will fund other scholars working on lost or obscure artists. It will ensure that other geniuses like Jouvet are not forgotten simply because they lack a famous name. It will be my life's work, and you will make it possible. Raphael's face was pale, but he saw the corner he was in. He nodded jerkily. Done. Third, Annalise said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal. The story of my involvement and my past is to remain completely private. There will be no press release naming me. My work is for the historical record, not for the gossip columns. To the world, the authentication will be credited to a private Swiss consultant, arranged by Mr. Laurent Dubois. Laurent inclined his head. Your privacy will be protected. You have my word. And finally, Annalise said, her eyes locking onto Raphael's. This was the most important term of all. My father, Philippe Dubois. He is not to be contacted. He is not to know of my involvement or that the Jouvet collection has been found. This investigation is mine. The discovery is mine. He forfeited any right to my life's work when he disowned it. This was her moment of true liberation. It wasn't just about the money or the foundation. It was about drawing a final indelible line between the person she was and the person he had tried to make her. Raphael, utterly defeated, could only nod. Agreed. Annalise stood up. The meeting concluded. Have your assistant send the legal paperwork for the foundation to my email. I will review it with my lawyer. Once the initial transfer of funds is complete and in escrow, I will be on a plane to Luxembourg. She turned to leave, but paused at the door and looked back at Raphael Montclair. And Mr. Montclair, she said, her voice devoid of malice, but sharp with finality. I expect my 2 weeks' notice at Le Chêne Doré will be accepted. I wouldn't want to leave them in the lurch. With that she walked out, leaving the 2 powerful men in her wake. Laurent Dubois was smiling a deep, appreciative smile. He had just witnessed a masterclass in negotiation, a reclamation of power that was more satisfying than any corporate takeover. Raphael Montclair sank into a chair, running a hand over his face. He felt like he'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight champion. He had been outmaneuvered, outclassed, and outsmarted by his waitress. The 25 million hurt, but his pride hurt more. Yet beneath the humiliation, a strange new feeling was taking root, a grudging, astonished respect. He had built his world by identifying value where others saw none, and he had just made the most colossal misjudgment of his life. A week later, Annalise Dubois, no longer a waitress, but a world-renowned expert stepping into her destiny, walked into a climate-controlled high-security vault deep beneath the streets of Luxembourg. The air was cold and still. Before her, arrayed on archival racks, were dozens of canvases shrouded in white cloth, the lost legacy of Jean-Baptiste Jouvet. She took a deep breath, the scent of old canvas and dried oil paint filling her lungs. It was the smell of home. She reached out and gently lifted the corner of a shroud. The color that met her eyes was unmistakable, a vibrant, ethereal blue she had only ever seen in her dreams, and in one tiny preparatory sketch in a forgotten museum archive. It was his sky. It was real. But as she began her methodical examination, moving from painting to painting, with a scholar's focused intensity, a small, cold knot of unease began to form in her stomach. The brushwork was perfect. The use of color was masterful. The compositions were breathtaking. It was Jouvet without a doubt. But something was wrong. As she moved toward the centerpiece of the collection, a magnificent large-scale painting, titled Le Balcon au Crépuscule. The balcony at dusk. The feeling intensified. This was supposed to be his magnum opus, the piece he described in his letters as the culmination of his life's work. She spent hours with the painting, examining it under different lights, using a handheld X-ray fluorescence spectrometer to analyze the paint pigments. The materials were all period correct. The canvas was from the right era, but a tiny detail almost invisible to the naked eye snagged her attention. In the corner, hidden in the depiction of a marble balustrade, was a tiny, almost microscopic signature. It wasn't Jouvet's flowing, elegant script. It was a different set of initials, expertly hidden within the veining of the marble E. Annelise's heart stopped. E.V. She knew those initials. Émile Vasseur, a notorious, brilliant forger from the early 20th century, famous for his ability to perfectly replicate Rococo masters. He was a ghost, almost as obscure as Jouvet himself, known only to a handful of art historians. Vasseur had a signature tell he always hid his own initials in his forgeries, a private act of ego from a master of deception. The centerpiece of the collection, the painting upon which a significant portion of its value rested, was a fake. A magnificent, perfect, multi-million-dollar fake. And then came the final gut-wrenching twist. As she cross-referenced the acquisition date with her own family's history, a dark and terrible possibility began to dawn. The collection was sold to the media conglomerate's founder in 1948 by a Swiss art dealer who was in desperate financial trouble. Annelise pulled up the archival sales record on her tablet. The seller's name was listed. The collection had been sold by her own great-grandfather, who had been ruined financially after the war. He had been forced to sell his most prized possession, the Jouvet paintings passed down through his family. But he couldn't bear to part with the true masterpiece, Le Balcon au Crépuscule. So, in an act of desperate preservation, he had commissioned the forger Émile Vasseur to create a perfect copy. He sold the real collection with the fake centerpiece, hiding the original away. Raphael Montclair wasn't just buying a collection with a forgery in it. He was buying Annelise's stolen family heritage. And the most valuable painting of all the real, Le Balcon au Crépuscule, was not in this vault. It was somewhere else, entirely. And Annelise, thanks to the journals of her grandfather, that she had memorized as a child, was the only person on earth who knew where. The revelation in the Luxembourg vault changed everything. Annelise sat on a stool in the sterile, silent room, the cold seeping into her bones. This was no longer a professional authentication. It was a deeply personal reclamation. The collection spread before her was a tangible link to a past she thought she had severed a history of family pride, desperation, and secrets. Her great-grandfather's desperate act of commissioning a forgery was not one of deceit for profit, but of love for the art itself. He had saved the soul of the collection while selling its body to survive. Her report would be a bombshell. It would save Raphael Montclair from catastrophic financial folly, but it would also expose a deeply personal family secret. She held all the cards. She could expose the forgery demand the return of the entire collection based on a claim of coerced sale, or she could play this a different way entirely. Revenge would be easy. Humiliating Raphael battling his army of lawyers, it was all possible. But her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, the gentle man from Montreux, who believed knowledge was the only true wealth. He would not have wanted a war. He would have wanted the art to be seen, to be honored. She made her decision. She flew back to Chicago and requested a final meeting. This time she chose the location, the quiet, sunlit garden of the Art Institute. It was her ground, surrounded by the masterpieces she revered. Raphael and Laurent were already there, waiting on a stone bench. Raphael looked haggard, the stress of the pending deal aging him. Laurent watched her approach with a knowing, patient expression. "The collection is authentic," Annelise said, without preamble, her voice clear and steady in the open air. Both men straightened. The vast majority of the paintings are without question the work of Jean-Baptiste Jouvet. They are magnificent, more so than the literature ever suggested. Raphael's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank God. So the deal is good. We can proceed. However, Annelise continued her gaze unwavering. The centerpiece Le Balcon au Crépuscule, upon which nearly 40% of the collection's estimated value is based, is a forgery. The relief on Raphael's face vanished, replaced by a ghastly pallor. What a forgery! But you just said. It is a brilliant museum-quality forgery, created in the 1940s by the master forger, Émile Vasseur, Annalise explained calmly. She laid out the evidence, the hidden initials, the subtle anomalies in pigment, layering only visible under XRF analysis, the historical context. You were about to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for a beautiful lie. Raphael sank onto the bench, looking utterly broken. It's over. The deal is dead. My reputation. I'm ruined. Not necessarily, Annalise said. He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. What do you mean? The collection belonged to my family, she stated simply. The words fell with quiet gravity. My great-grandfather was forced to sell it after the war. He commissioned the forgery because he could not bear to part with the true masterpiece. He sold the collection to save his family, but he saved the painting to preserve its soul. Laurent listened, his head bowed slightly, connecting the final pieces of the puzzle. It was a story of honor and hardship he understood perfectly. Where is the real one? Raphael whispered, his voice barely audible. It's safe, Annalise replied. It has been for over 70 years, and I am prepared to help you acquire it. Raphael stared at her, utterly bewildered. Help me, after how I treated you, after everything. Why, because of two things, Mr. Montclair, Annalise said finally, allowing herself a small, genuine smile. First, the painting deserves to be seen. It does not belong in a hidden vault or a dusty attic. It belongs in a museum where the world can appreciate Jouvet's genius. Your acquisition, for all its corporate trappings, is the vehicle for that. She paused, her expression becoming more serious. And second, because of the foundation. The $25 million you endowed is not just money. It is a promise to elevate the forgotten, to give a voice to the overlooked. It is a legacy. You have perhaps unintentionally done a very good thing. You have funded the work my grandfather would have championed. In a way, you have honored him. For that, I will help you complete your collection and secure your own legacy. This was not the language Raphael Montclair understood. He dealt in profits, losses, and hostile takeovers. He was being offered a gift, an act of grace from the woman he had tried to belittle. The sheer unexpected decency of it struck him harder than any insult or legal threat could have. It was a lesson in a kind of power he never knew existed. The final act was a masterpiece of quiet negotiation, led by Annalise. The real Le Balcon au Crépuscule, which had been hidden behind a false wall in a small family-owned chalet in the Swiss Alps, was discovered. Annalise, acting as the private consultant, authenticated it. Raphael's company acquired it through a private sale, the proceeds of which went directly into a trust Annalise established for her family's name, securing their history forever. The forged painting was quietly donated to a university art department as a study piece on master forgery techniques. The deal for the media conglomerate went through, bolstered by the now fully authenticated legendary Jouvet collection. Raphael Montclair became even wealthier, but the experience had irrevocably changed him. The brash arrogance was tempered by a new, unfamiliar humility. He had been shown the vast landscape of his own ignorance, and been offered a map by the very person he had tried to strand there. He never saw Annalise again after the final papers were signed. There was no dramatic farewell. Their business was concluded. Annalise did not return to Geneva. She did not reclaim her title as an heiress. She stayed in Chicago, the city where she had found her freedom. She moved out of the small apartment above the bookstore and into a tasteful brownstone, which she promptly filled with books. She became the full-time active director of the Dubois-Jouvet Foundation. Her days were spent poring over research grants, traveling to obscure archives, and helping other brilliant, passionate scholars bring forgotten artists into the light. She had done more than escape her past. She had confronted it, mastered it, and reshaped it into a future of her own design. She had not needed her father's fortune or a billionaire's approval. She had found her worth not in a bank vault or a boardroom, but in a quiet act of dignity, in a restaurant, a flawless line of French, and the unshakable knowledge of who she was. She was Annalise Dubois, and she was finally completely free. That's the story of how a single sentence, spoken in the right language at the right time, unraveled one man's arrogance and unlocked another woman's destiny. It's a powerful reminder that we should never ever judge a person by their job, their accent, or the uniform they wear. The quietest person in the room is often the most powerful, armed with knowledge and dignity that money can't buy. Annalise's story shows us that true strength isn't about dominating others, but about having unshakable faith in your own worth. She didn't just win an argument. She rewrote her entire life on her own terms. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like these are why we do what we do. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale of hidden strength and unexpected justice. Thank you for listening.